So please keep your mic muted, and you can still engage in the chat using the reaction buttons. And if you want to put in the chat right now, please put in your name, pronouns, and what you're looking to gain from this workshop. Hello. Thanks. If you would like to see who is spotlighted, please put your view on speaker view. And if you would like to see all the members on the call, please feel free to change your view to gallery view. After Evan presents, we will have a section for Q&A after the presentation, and feel free to put all of your questions in the chat when you think of them so that we can have a queue up. And what to expect from today's workshop is why the Georgia Youth Poll Worker Project was created, programs that the Georgia Youth Poll Worker Project runs, and how you can get involved, followed by an open discussion at the end. Afterwards, feel free to ask any questions. And now I'm going to hand it off to our amazing Puffin Democracy Fellow, Evan Malbrough.
I was muted. Hi, my name is Evan Malbrough. I am a Puffin Democracy Fellow. I graduated from Georgia State University in May of 2020 with a degree in public policy. So it's nice to have you guys here. I was an Andrew Goodman ambassador between 2017 all the way till when I graduated in 2020. So I'm excited to be here with you guys and help you guys learn about, adding the extra factor of election work to your already impactful voting rights work. So yeah, you wanna, DJ, you wanna hop into the presentation? Perfect. So my job right now is I am the founder and executive director of the Georgia Youth Poll Worker Project. Next slide. So what is the Georgia Youth Poll Worker Project? So the Georgia Youth Poll Worker Project is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization that is geared towards recruiting young people and educating young people about the importance of election work and how we as young people need to be election workers, right? So in a democracy, there are about three pillars, right? There's the people that vote, there's the elected officials that get voted in, but in between those two pillars, there's a third pillar, which is the people who actually work to administer the elections. Without the people that work to administer the elections, there wouldn't be a way for people who vote and people to be elected to actually connect together to form the government and society we see today. This is why election workers are so important. And this is why when we have shortages of election workers, it actually hurts our initial access to democracy. So a little bit about the Poll Worker Project. So I started the Georgia Youth Poll Worker Project on July 1st, 2021. I'm sorry, 2020, right? July 1st hasn't happened yet, but July 1st, 2020. And I started it because in Georgia, I worked as a poll worker during the June 9th elections in Georgia. So if you watch the news on June 9th, you would probably have seen the fact that Georgia pretty much had a widespread election failure. There were 4 to 6 hour wait times, precincts were shutting down, votes were being lost, and basically Georgia was in the news, as it has been for the past year, for basically being a bad place for elections. And something I realized when I was working that election and seeing the news story is that we mostly focused on the policy around voting, but we didn't really focus around another systematic issue, which was the staffing. So when I worked early voting in the state of Georgia. Early voting is 3 weeks, and I worked at one of 5 precincts in Fulton County, which is the largest county in the state of Georgia and holds about a third of the city of Atlanta, one of the largest cities in our country. And what happened was our lines were so long because we didn't have enough election workers and enough materials to actually serve the lines as quickly as possible. Towards the end of the early voting period on election day, we had 4-hour wait times. We also had an issue because we had switched over our election systems right before the pandemic hit. So nobody, especially the older people who usually work the precincts, had any grasp on the technology that was used to actually administer the new technology used to administer the elections, right? So you had, 70-year-old people using iPads for the first time to try to serve hundreds or thousands of people when it comes to voting, right? So that's where this failure came in. It wasn't just a failure of Georgia election law, which fails Georgians all the time. It was also a failure of the fact that we didn't have enough people to staff the elections. So in response to June 9th, I started the Poll Worker Project as a way to fight this back. The idea is that young people needed money because all poll workers in the country are paid, and a lot of young people lost their jobs, including myself, because of the pandemic. Young people were more adept to the technology. Georgia employed an almost all touchscreen system, so we had to, we were easily able to adapt to the technology and troubleshoot the technology. And B, and the last one, or C, the fact of the matter is, if we don't have enough poll workers, that means we do not have enough precincts to serve our communities. And oftentimes, when there is scarcity, it will affect the most marginalized communities, which are Black and Brown communities, most. So I started the Poll Worker Project on July 1st, and it was literally just an Instagram. And as we moved through July 1st all the way to the election and to the runoff, it grew into a full-fledged nonprofit. And before I go into stuff, so basically the reason why I am giving this seminar is I want to teach all of you guys not to make the mistakes I made, right? Because basically I had no experience running a nonprofit. I was a voting rights activist. I knew the material, but I didn't know how to build an actual organization. And what I hope you guys get from this presentation is the fact that you guys can build your own projects even better than mine, right? And have a lot less stress. So here's what we were able to achieve during the 2020 elections and 2021 runoff. We were able to recruit 1,000 poll workers, all young people, all paid positions. It takes around 8 to 10 people to actually serve an entire precinct. So we recruited almost the equivalent of 100 precincts worth of poll workers. And then we recruited them in the metro Atlanta area. Cobb, Clayton, DeKalb, Fulton, and Gwinnett County. These are the biggest counties in Georgia. They host most of Georgia's population as well as most of Georgia's minority population. And we were able to staff them in multiple roles, whether it be election technicians, whether it be early voting, whether it be election day voting, as well as a lot of positions that many people do not know go in to actually administering these elections. Through that, we actually had a lot of events and a lot of partnerships. We were able to partner with Ben & Jerry's, New Georgia Project, which is our fiscal sponsor. I'll get more into that, why that is important. Future Coalition, Patagonia, and Universal Music Group. And then the actual organization itself was built. I was able to raise in the election period around $52,000 for general programming and expenses, as well as won 2 grants from MTV. So that's just a lot of stuff we did. And then if you look in the picture, these are my interns I ended up hiring. I was able to partner with my university to hire 5 Georgia State interns. I went to Georgia State, and they actually helped me in achieving this goal of recruiting 1,000 poll workers. So DJ, can you, next slide, please? So here's a little bit about the elections we served, right? A little over 4 million people voted in the 2020 general election, making up 57.3% of all eligible voters in the state, and more than half of them voted early. Then with the youth turnout, 500,000 young people voted early in 2020, making up 52 to 55% of the youth that voted in 2020. And then Georgia tied with Virginia for the highest youth election turnout, with 1 in 5 people actually stepping up to vote. So basically, if you worked at a precinct, 1 in 5 of the people you would see were young people, which complemented the huge numbers of young people that came out to actually work the polls as well. And then we thought our job was done after November, but then we had one of the biggest runoffs in American history, with 2 seats that would decide whichever party controls the United States Senate. So in that one, we had about 3 million people vote, a little over 3 million people vote with, voted early. So 3 million voted early, and then 1.3 million voted in the runoff, right? So we actually had more people vote in the runoff than the actual general election. So then what happened? Georgia ended up electing 2 Democratic senators in its first history. Just to say that in a nonpartisan way, that's what happened. And then we had some of the highest youth turnout in 2 elections in the state of Georgia. Moving forward. So now we are moving over to what my project's about. So how did this happen? How did we play into it? And what I'm calling it is the Hitchhiker's Guide to Starting a Poll Worker Project. So if anybody wants to take notes, you can start now. So basically, the next few slides we'll go over is how I started my poll worker project, how the things I learned, the mistakes I made, and the things I wish I knew on day one, right? So each page, and also for my actual Puffin project itself, you will actually get a pamphlet of it that you guys can have to copy, edit, and apply to yourselves, right? So let's get started. Next slide. Sorry. The need for poll workers, right? So going back to what I said in the beginning, poll workers are a very necessary part of democracy. They're one of the three pillars that maintain our democracy. And if that pillar falls, the entire democracy falls, right? So when you're trying to build your project, you got to really make sure that you know the importance of your project, just in the same way many of you guys as ambassadors and alumni know how important it is to do voter registration, GOTV, and voter information campaigns. Um, when it comes to recruiting poll worker projects, you're actually moving more out of the advocacy field and more into the idea of government relations. Because when you want to build those pipelines into getting students hired, you have to work with local and city governments who hold the keys to the pipelines to get students hired as poll workers, right? So something I want to emphasize, which is the last sentence of the first slide, is without poll workers, we cannot have a free and fair election because there won't be enough access for communities that need them most, right? So without poll workers, you don't get free and fair elections, right? So that's why our slogan at the Poll Worker Project is we fight for a free, fair, and well-staffed election, which gets all of those three pillars and actually gives a voice to communities that need them the most. So now let's get into the nitty-gritty of starting a project, right? So I started my project on Instagram on July 1st. So some of the first things I did was I created a Poll Worker Project Instagram account. I went to Canva and actually created a logo for the Poll Worker Project, which is the orange logo you guys see there. And then, and then I made my first mistake. So when I started the Poll Worker Project, I just thought it was just going to be an Instagram I would do for my house and a Google form that I would use to get the signups to send to the government entities. But what I didn't do was I did not register my nonprofit as a nonprofit or as a nonprofit entity with the state of Georgia until many months later. What was the reason why? I had no idea I had to. And what happened was when the Poll Workers Project started gaining prominence, I could not expand the project because I could legally not take money. So for all of you guys that want to start your poll worker project, whether it be in your school, in your Vote Everywhere chapter, or in or when you're a graduate and you want to start in your local communities, be sure you have the necessary paperwork filed and the necessary business identification so that you can actually start making money. Well, not making money, but raising money to do that, right? When the poll worker project was just me, it was very inefficient. But when I was able to get my 5 paid interns and later my full-time staff or my part-time staff members, I was able to have a lot better of an impact. And it took a lot of stress out of me in person, right? So my first mistake was not certifying my project as a business or a nonprofit and not being able to get those funds early on. So that's something I want you to make a note of. Start the project on Instagram, start the front facing part of the operation, but also get the back of the operation that supports it in order, or your operational foundation in order. The second thing I did, well, the thing I did before I opened the Instagram as well is I reached out to the counties I wanted to serve. My advice for many of you, if you want to start your poll worker project, don't start with your entire state, because that's going to be very hard. For example, Georgia has 159 counties. So if I wanted to have a full poll worker project, I would have had to reach out and correspond with 159 election boards that are all different and all have different processes. And as a singular person, I would not have been able to do that. So what I would recommend to you guys is maybe start in your own county or start in your metro area, or start in the counties where the major universities and youth centers are. because that means you'll have youth ready to work in counties that are probably needing workers, as many urban areas face poll worker shortages every election, even pre-COVID. So, sorry. So yeah, and if you're starting it on your campus, it'll be easy. Just start recruiting student poll workers on your campus. One way we can easily start a poll worker project on your campus is to actually get a precinct on your campus and convince your county to allow it to be fully student run. That's what we did at Georgia State University, and that was one of the early predecessors of the poll worker project, because we were able to get students to sign up, get the training, and actually serve their fellow students on campus. So now we're at the point to starting your Instagram. So now you started your Instagram, you've gotten your paperwork, and then you have reached out to the counties to build the poll worker pipelines. And usually what I would recommend is just send them an email. A lot of the counties I worked with, I cold called. And in my Puffin worksheet, DJ, can you help me? I don't know what exactly it's called. My Puffin report, there is going to be a draft email I sent. And basically how I drafted the email, I said, hey, I am trying to recruit young people to be poll workers. Do you have an election shortage? And if so, I would love to recruit poll workers for you free as charge, right? And many counties and municipalities are underfunded, so they'll probably take you up on your offer. The counties I worked with, they needed young people, they needed people in all positions, so they really were very open and susceptible. And then finally, for starting your program, your poll worker program, you need to know what positions you're recruiting for. Because a lot of people only see election workers as the people you see who take in the ballots. But there's a huge range of election workers that you can be recruiting for in your community. For example, the Georgia Youth Poll Worker Project didn't just recruit regular election workers. We also recruited election technicians. We recruited drivers to drive the materials to and from precincts. We also recruited call center workers. And then some of our biggest categories of recruiting was recruiting people to count the mail-in ballots. As many people voted by mail, you need to build wider infrastructure to actually count those ballots. So those are all paid positions, and those are all places that we can get students involved and students paid in. So to recap, right? So first things first, get your paperwork done. Second things, get your Instagram or whatever platform you want to use for recruitment done. And also get your Google form ready, or job form, or any other form for signups. Then go to your counties or municipalities or universities to start creating the pipelines to get students hired and get students informed about being a poll worker. And once you get all, and then finally know what positions you're hiring for and know what positions the counties are looking for. And then once you get all those things together, you can officially launch your poll worker project. And once you launch your poll worker project, you can start recruiting poll workers. What I did was I put all the poll workers I recruited on a spreadsheet based off of county. So in the form, I had them indicate which county they officially lived in. And then weekly, I would send the new poll worker counts to the counties every day, and the counties would then put them through their hiring process. So those are my first steps. So now let's move over to some more in-depth concepts that you might want to consider when starting your poll worker project. DJ? First off, multilingual poll workers, right? Many of your communities are not solely English speaking, right? And when it comes to things like ballot initiatives and other things that people vote on, having access to language skills is very important for these communities, right? So for example, in Gwinnett County has a huge Spanish speaking population along with a very large Korean population as well. So part of our form was having students indicate what languages they speak fluently so that the counties can know where to put these students. And that's something I would recommend to you guys as well, right? It makes a huge difference for a diverse core of poll workers, because it allows people, the system to help people vote, since you'll be a part of that system. One example I use is, I'm Black, of course, as you guys can see. I remember one time I was helping a precinct, and a precinct called me and they said, hey, we can't find this person's name. The person was a Black woman. She had a very Afrocentric name, and it had an apostrophe in it, right? So with many of the poll workers, they were typing in her name incorrectly into the voter roll system, and they were not able to find her. And then when I informed them that she probably put the apostrophe in it, they were able to find her almost immediately, which was the difference between her voting provisionally and not having her vote count immediately to having that vote count immediately. And that's just an example of vernacular and cultural competency. Now imagine if you have a person who walks in who only speaks Korean, right? Or who only speaks Spanish, and nobody there can serve them. It could create a huge barrier for them. It create a huge barrier for them to actually get access to the ballot and be able to understand what they're voting for and make their vote count. So what I would say is that when you're recruiting poll workers, make sure that you're being cognizant of the areas you're recruiting in, and make sure that you are gearing your recruitment methods to serve those areas in full. So not just getting poll workers, but poll workers who can actually speak and understand the languages of the communities you want to serve. And then social media. So social media made up around 80% of the poll workers I recruited, social media. So I use LinkedIn and I use Instagram predominantly. So what I would do is I would go on Canva, great resource. I would make graphics identifying what type of jobs I'm hiring for, the importance of poll workers. I would post regular graphics about how to sign up. It's important for how important it is for poll workers. And then something else I did was I reached out to elected officials in the areas I want to recruit in because they have huge followings there and a lot of influence. So what I would do is I would have elected officials write me quotes about the importance of poll workers. I would turn those into graphics and I would post them on Instagram and LinkedIn and tag them. And the hope was that those elected officials would also share it on their pages, and we would get a lot more traffic to our site. One example I would use is Park Cannon, right? So Park Cannon, she was my state rep when I was at Georgia State. She was over my district at Georgia State. And she was actually the first elected official to endorse the poll worker project. It's actually a pretty funny story. We were supposed to launch the project on July 1st. So I had the Instagram and the first post ready, but I hadn't made the Instagram public. So a few days earlier, I asked Park, no, on June 30th, I asked Park, hey, when I launched the Instagram page, could you please shout it out and share the page and everything? And she was like, oh yeah, sure. So she interpreted that as, oh, we need to share the page immediately on June 30th. So before I even started, thanks to Park Cannon's shout out and Park Cannon support, I got like 50 followers and 25 signups before I even launched the project officially, right? So if you can get that support in your communities and from your elected officials, it can go a long way. Other things to consider, look at fraternities and sororities, right? They have chapters all across the country and in your communities, and they're very close knit. A program we did was we worked with different Greek lines to have a line staff a precinct, right? So a line can be anywhere from 4 people to 50 people, depending on the fraternity or sorority. And we said, hey, how about you guys make this precinct and adopt this precinct as your own? And that led to a lot of our recruitment because there were so many close-knit communities that were able to get those numbers and bring those numbers up, and they were reliable because they held themselves accountable to be a part of this. So those are just some strategies. Reach out to elected officials, reach out to close-knit groups, and then also reach out to other nonprofits. Many voting rights nonprofits, they didn't know about the importance of poll workers until we started seeing the effects of poll worker shortages. So reach out to them and really help them understand the importance for poll workers and help them promote your cause. Because if somebody's willing to volunteer at a precinct, odds are they're very much willing to work at a precinct and get paid. All right, and share your stuff. All right, next line. Okay, actually go back. I have one more thing. Something else, right? So if you're starting your poll worker project in the heat of an election like I did, the odds of you getting your 501c3 status is very low before the election happens, right? I'm still waiting on my 501c3 status. But if you can find an org, preferably a voter registration org, that does not have a poll worker program, you can pitch that to them as something that they can physically sponsor for you to do. So my org that physically sponsors the poll worker project is the New Georgia Project. Basically what our conversation was like was we had New Georgia Project, they wanted to start recruiting poll workers, and they saw that I was already doing it successfully on my own, but I couldn't take any money. So they came to me and said, hey, come under our umbrella. You can fundraise and then have them send the checks to us, and then we would deposit that to you so that the money is 501c3 and tax free, and you have more likelihood of getting donors, especially bigger donors, right? So when I talk about all my grants and all my donations, they actually went to the New Georgia Project first, and New Georgia Project gave that money to my org that allowed us to do what we need to do. And of course, with that comes an agreement signed between the New Georgia Project and the Poll Worker Project. I have weekly check-ins with them to let them know about what I'm doing. For example, they know about this, as well as I financially report what I do with the money to them for their tax purposes. So yeah, so let's talk about moving ahead. Next slide, please. So part of being a poll worker is you have to be trained. You can't just walk into a precinct and learn the election machines on the job, right? It's because that leads to a lot of mistakes, that leads to a lot of meltdowns, and it could lead to a lot of voters not getting ballots, right? So part of it is when you're starting your poll worker project, you should maybe consider becoming a poll worker trainer. It's because there's a huge influx of people signing up to be poll workers, a lot of county finds it hard to train them because they don't have the infrastructure to do that, right? Before the pandemic, 90% of poll workers were career poll workers. They were older folks who was doing poll workers for 5, 10, 20 years, who knew the systems inside out, so they didn't really need training. But now, since a lot of older people have stopped being poll workers because of COVID, now the counties need to train a lot more and more. And if they don't have people who are ready and willing to train them, it'll be harder to get new poll workers out and open new precincts. So something I did as the founder of the Poll Worker Project is I actually became a poll worker trainer in Fulton County. And now what I'm doing is I'm actually working with Georgia State University to actually have poll working certification courses at my university. And that's something that is very possible for all of you as well. All it really is getting a partnership between your county that in the election office and your university to have a poll worker instructor or train you to be a poll worker instructor and certify students to become poll workers in their precinct and host those classes. So in Georgia State, I actually just had a meeting about this at 11 at Eastern Time. We are actually trying to open a poll worker academy on Georgia State that will constantly train comprehensively Georgia State students to become poll workers so that Fulton County, where Georgia State is located, can have a steady stream of students becoming poll workers, a steady stream of people willing to work elections, and they'll never have to worry about staffing the Georgia State precinct because there will always be students ready and willing to actually work that precinct at any given time, whether it be a special election, whether it be a general election, whether it be a runoff. Moving forward. Now, the last thing, you guys should join me, right? The Georgia Youth Poll Worker Project is not alone. It's groups. There's something to be said about groups who start in the middle of a crisis, right? But a lot of times what happens is those groups don't last after the crisis is over. So a lot of the stuff we need to do is we need to build grassroots networks of poll worker projects and poll workers campus teams, right? So what I, as a Puffin Fellow to all the AGF ambassadors and alumni, what I am offering is the ability to build a national poll worker project, which is an amalgamation of poll worker projects in states and communities all across the country. If you need help with finding things like physical sponsorship um, or creating language around poll worker projects, or knowing how to reach out to elected officials or advice on how to reach out to elected officials, I am open. My contact information is on the next slide, and I would love to work with each and every one of you to create a poll worker project on your campus, in your local community, or in your state, right? Because there was a poll worker shortage before COVID-19. During COVID-19, it exacerbated that same poll worker shortage. And if we don't work hard and don't do this grassroots organizing and sustain this organizing, there'll be a poll worker shortage years from now. And because of that, we need to make sure that we're doing everything everything possible to stop another poll worker shortage from happening. And that could be something as little as just incorporating poll worker recruitment into your work as an AGF ambassador when elections come around. And yep, and also misspelled election, apologies. But that is my presentation. This is my phone number, this is my email, and then this is my website, the Georgia Youth Poll Worker Project.org. I made it on Squarespace. My Puffin educational pamphlet will be coming out within the next few months, and it's going to have all of this, including samples, including websites and subscriptions I use that help us with our day-to-day, anything from like DocuSign to Canva to Squarespace and other things like that, and in-depth knowledge and step-by-step instructions on how to make a robust and sustainable poll worker project. All right.
Thank you so much, Evan. Now we're going to open it up for an open discussion. So please feel free to either just take yourself off mute, raise your hand, and we will answer any and all questions until 12:55.
Hi, Evan. My name's Allie Cashel. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from Democracy Works. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. Was super interested to hear about what you're doing with that certification course. I'd be interested to hear a little bit more about what you needed to get in terms of like institutional buy-in from the campus in order to make that happen. Or is that just something you were sort of able to set up with the local election official?
It was a little bit. So when it comes to institutions, from my experience, institutions have been very squeamish about engaging in electoral work, but something I used to convince them was the fact that the innovation factor. So Georgia State, for example, is like one of like the top 2 or 5 innovative schools in the country. And I basically, when I pitched this to them, I said, hey, this could be a great way for you to be innovative. And then also I highlighted the need for poll workers and the fact that this would give students jobs through professional development. They'll be able to get paid, they'll be able to work on campus and make money. And that's what allowed my university to get that university and institutional buy-in. Other things is I highlighted areas where these type of certifications have been helpful to students. So for example, Georgia State is a part of the Nonprofit Leadership Council, where they have a nonprofit leadership certificate that involves working at nonprofits and things like this. So I pitched it saying that it would mirror these programs just for elections and democracy. Hope that answered your question. Say it again.
Oh, I just said thank you. That's super helpful.
And then also for starting it, you technically don't need the institution's buy-in, because if there's already a precinct on your campus, that means the institution is already open to that precinct, but the institution does not have any say in who staffs it. So that means if there's already a precinct on your campus, all you really have to do is go to your county election office with 8 or 10 students willing to work the precinct. And I'm very sure that that county will be open to training all of them and then just sticking them there at that precinct together. Because then it will allow them to fan out a lot of the other poll workers to communities that need them more.
Makes sense, thanks.
Any other questions?
Evan, thank you so much for this training. This is amazing, actually. Question related to the recruitment part. When you're recruiting, I think like one point you had said about was like for instance, like possibly a sorority line, for instance, staffing a precinct. When you're recruiting, are you also, I'm assuming you're doing nonpartisan recruiting? And I know that for these positions, is there any kind of specifics you have to do to, what's the question I'm trying to ask? related to both Democrats and Republicans, students, nonpartisan recruitment in that manner. Has, for instance, have you ever had issues with Board of Elections feeling like your list is leaning in any particular way? Or are they usually accepting generally of whatever you're giving to them? I ask this because I'm based in Staten Island and we, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's,
no,
that's a
I'll
great
stop
question.
there. That's kind of,
Oh, yeah, that's a great question. So the thing about this is that though this is like democracy, right? And I'm a democracy fellow and everything. In all actuality, this is really just a jobs program, right? So you're not really like, it's not like you being a voter registration person where you have the thing, so well, are you just registering Democrats, you're just registering students, or potential Democrats or potential Republicans. You're really just getting people hired, right? So if you know, make that the foundation of your work, those issues wouldn't come because the need for money and to be able to support yourself is a universal need amongst Democrat and Republicans. So I never really advertise it as more of like a partisan thing or even had to even attempt to step into the partisan realm because basically my pitch to most kids was just like, hey, you know, I know you're broke because I'm broke. How about we start working these elections and we can get paid, right? Like, for example, the biggest selling point for my program is that the state of Georgia, after the during the June 9th period and then in the November period, they were paying $14 an hour for election clerks. That was the lowest pay. That was the base pay with $100 of hazard pay every day for 3 weeks, right? So you would make $2,100 just off of the hazard pay alone, along with the $14. So if you advertise on that, you wouldn't have to worry about partisanship because all you're going to get is students that just want to make money. And that's when the research and building the pipeline comes in. I would have the county actually come to me and say, hey, here are the rates we're paying, here are the jobs we're recruiting for. And if you can give that information in an easily digestible fashion, that will be more of a driving force than any of the, because, as voting rights activists, we always love, our platitudes like, oh yeah, we're preserving democracy, or, it's time for young people to live the legacy. And that's all cute. But it won't appeal to many broke college students as much as saying, hey, if you work for 3 weeks, you can make up to $4,000. Which I did it personally. That's how I got my personal car. And many of my friends did it, and many of the people I hired did it, right? And going through that approach will catch a lot more students than just saying, oh, we want to preserve democracy, where a lot of people will be like, oh, well, now you're dipping into the partisan sphere. DJ, I hope I don't get in trouble for saying that because I'm a democracy, so.
That's a great point, Evan. Follow the money, basically. You're right.
Right, because this is a poll worker project is a jobs program through and through. You are working to get students hired. It just so happens that you're getting them hired in one of our essential democratic processes.
Before we continue, I just want to quickly say I'm signing off. Jarvis Benson, who is one of our program managers, will be continuing recording. Thank you so much to everyone who came, and we'll be ending at 12:55.
Well, hi, Evan. Sorry, go on.
No, you're good. I thought, ask your question and then I'll ask mine since I already asked one.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you so much for all of this. This was super helpful and really interesting. I love what you're doing. But when I was thinking about how this might apply to, like my university and my community, one of the things that I sort of ran into was the fact that election day is not like a university holiday at BGSU, is it? And so my question is, do schools in Georgia or your university that you graduated from, do they typically have like classes off on election day? Are they flexible with students who want to do this? Because we did do some recruitment of like students to work the polls on election day, but the issue that we really ran into was students didn't want to, miss classes. And so that was kind of an issue. And so I was wondering, like, was that an issue that you ran into and how did you navigate that?
Oh, that absolutely was. So when the first student run precinct at GSU, what we did was, since it was through my Vote Everywhere chapter, we actually were able to get excuse letters for the VP of Civic Engagement. And then luckily, a lot of the people we recruited were poli-sci and pre-law majors. So a lot of the professors understood and were able to move assignments around. So a lot of us actually did have excuse letters from the VP of Community Outreach and Civic Engagement. And that's what we did. So maybe in the early bit, that's why I would say what I would recommend in the early bit of your planning process to actually work with the university when it comes to that aspect, right? Because if you can get full, like your county that's over your elections to say, okay, we're gonna let all of these students staff your precinct. First off, that's a very big marketing ploy. Well, not marketing ploy, but marketing opportunity for universities to say, look how civically engaged our students are. They don't just vote, they run the precinct. And that would give you a lot of leeway for administration to excuse those students, right? So for example, we actually got excused for 2 days. So in Fulton County, during our early voting period, we have a roaming precinct that goes to all the college campuses. So in the 21 days of early voting, there's one precinct that goes to each college campus for 2 days. So we caught that rolling precinct on our 2 days, and we're able to staff it and then get days off for that, right? And then of course, you have to turn in your assignments, yada, yada, yada. I mean, sometimes the precinct would be empty, so we would just do our homework while we're waiting for people to come in to vote. But it's just things like that. So if you put in enough planning, enough prep, and you use, your university's interest when it comes to marketing and promoting civic engagement and student engagement, it could be a great opportunity for you to get those students excused.
So basically you had to kind of work with like upper level administration to like arrange for that excuse then, is what you're saying?
Right. So I said, hey, here are the lists. He said, here's what we're trying to do. We want to staff our precinct on campus to give students the ability to vote. And they say, can you excuse the students? Like send it to their professors, can you excuse the students? And it took some massaging and some stuff, but they basically said, all right, cool, send a spreadsheet with all the names of the students and all the professors, and we can excuse them from class.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you so much.
Of course.
I'll hop in there again. I was trying to give other folks chances to ask questions. Evan, can you talk a bit about the process for registering for a nonprofit? Can you go a little bit?
Oh man, LegalZoom? Yeah, LegalZoom. So basically what I did was the Secretary of State's website in Georgia, I got registered as a nonprofit corporation there. That allowed me to get my fiscal sponsorship, right? So basically I paid the fees, got my nonprofit corporations, and then I went to New Georgia Project and said, hey, I'm a nonprofit corporation, but I don't have the federal 501c3 status. And this is, I'm just saying it so you can be the most expedient with it, right? So then I took that nonprofit corporation, which could take around a week to 3 weeks, which is a lot quicker than the actual nonprofit status. And then what I did was, once I got my fiscal sponsorship, I was able to operate as a nonprofit under New Georgia Project and agree to their terms. And then I went to LegalZoom and actually got them to file my nonprofit paperwork. So I provided them with that corporation, with the fact that I'm already working under a nonprofit, what I want to do, and then I paid them and they handled that, right? So now it's just waiting in the filing process. I would say don't do it yourself if you are not a lawyer, because basically what New Georgia Project told me is like, hey man, the reason why you probably should get a lawyer for this is because if you make one mistake, that could set your process back 3 or 4 weeks. So I would say either go to a lawyer or find a legal entity that can do that expediently. And then you're just waiting for the right paperwork to be filed rather than you trying to figure out if you're doing that paperwork right yourself.
Thank you.
Of course. Any other questions?
I do have another
Of course.
question. Can you, okay, so for me, when I was thinking about like starting a New York youth poll worker project, I thought, you know, simple, do an Instagram, do a Google form, get folks to sign up, send it to the, you know, board of election, no money needed, et cetera, et cetera. So can you talk more about what the expenses like turn out to be? Like what, yeah, where does the money come in? Like what are you using it? What's the expansion looking like and all of that,
Right.
that kind of stuff.
And then in my write-up, I'm actually going to include like my first bill. You know, like how athletes do how I spent my first $1 million. I'm gonna do like how I spent my first $5,000 grant, right? So getting a Canva premium account, right? Paying for the actual nonprofit corporation, paying for the LegalZoom services to actually do that, paying for the website and IP. Oh, getting a mailbox somewhere else. So getting a mailbox like at a UPS or a post office to get your mail and get your official documents. Other things you can pay for, the promotion of Instagram ads, right? So paid ads in places like that. So those are things now. For me, part of the payment was actually for myself because I did not have a job at the time and I was working 100% for free. So I actually paid myself in order to maintain this. And then also just paying for the 501c3 process and the nonprofit corporations. I believe to get my nonprofit corporation, it was about to expedite it. It was around $300 in total. So stuff like that. So, and then when I got my bigger job, when I got my bigger grant, I was able to pay for 5 interns from Georgia State. I paid them $500 a month for 10 hours a week so that they could run it and stuff like that. So it really just depends. I use as many free resources as possible, but sometimes you do have to come out of pocket. So it can be a very cheap and a very lean process, especially if you already have access to this. Also, you know, pay for things that just make your life easier, like DocuSign, right? DocuSign, you know, it's a lot easier than trying, oh, let's do this, like Calendly, you know, just shut up for the premium package because it really just helps with making everything move smoothly so you're not just running around and rushing.
Thank you.
Also, last bit of advice, I definitely gave my phone number to all of my poll workers. Yeah, don't do that. I'll put it in my thing too. Don't do that. Actually, maybe get a Google number, and I'll put that in my sheet as well. Get a Google number so that they can call or a text line service or something because they will call you. I remember one time, Fulton County, they were late on their paychecks, right? So it was payday and nobody got paid, and my phone was blowing up. Because basically I'm the one that's telling them they're going to get paid, right? So if you're the front person, if something goes wrong, the first person they're going to call is you. So get a Google number, get a text line, or get a helpline or help email. Don't put your personal information. I know you want to be up there and out there, but trust me, you know, you won't be able to take 3 steps without somebody calling you about an issue. So yeah, do that. Any other questions? We have about 4 minutes left. All right, well, that looks like it's it, man. Thank you guys so much. But yeah, thank you guys for coming to my Puffin seminar. Wait. Yes, please fill out the survey for this seminar. It'll be sent as well. So we know if this programming is helping you guys advance your work. And yeah, thank you guys for coming.